Hey there, kids! You know what it's time for? That's right, it's the Spotty Show! His first name's Sam and his last is Plotkin, but they call him Splotty Splotty. Welcome to the Splot Show! Good morning, everyone. So, before we start, I just want to make an announcement or a reminder, hopefully, for you. Payment and the order forms for the AP exam are due May 1st. The order form and check needs to go to this web address. By the way, all this I just posted. It is on our Google Classroom, so you could access it right there. If you click here, this is the order form that you're sending with it. If you don't have a printer, just fill out the same information on a piece of paper, like handwrite it, and mail it with your check to the business office. Okay, that's it for that. Nobody really got back to me about anything they want me to be doing that I haven't been doing as far as review, so I'm just going to keep going ahead. After today, we're going to start, today and tomorrow because it's a long one, we're going to start looking into old AP examinations. We have a new one that they're giving based on the new rubric, so we're going to look at those, and then we're going to see what some samples are. We're going to be writing our own, etc. You can skip. It's 45 minutes actually, not 40, and they're giving you an additional 5 minutes. I just found out to turn it in, because there might be some heavy traffic with people turning it in. I'm not sure how this is going to work out, guys. You might need more than the 5 minutes because of the heavy traffic. Who knows? The reason I'm not going over this is we went over it last class, but you know, this is the one that it's important to annotate. Here was the rubric we went over. And here we go. Your job on the AP exam is to read the passages and analyze how they are written. The good news is that you can train yourself to make insightful analyses by dissecting whatever you read. Practice with a pencil in hand. And as you read almost any respectable piece of prose, remember from the beginning of the year we spoke about this? Jot down reasons why the author chose particular words and details. Examine sentence structure and the sequence of ideas. Why does he first say this and then go into this? Identify how the author creates a tone and develops the main idea. Like every other worthwhile skill, annotating a passage in this manner takes time, and to do it well takes even more time, especially at the beginning, and especially when you're doing it on a computer. It can be burdensome, frustrating, and even discouraging, but just a single, reasonably astute insight can beget another and another after that. Prime example, I'm going to call out Alex Zaborowski. He, for the last test especially, he found something. He found this notion with diction, and it snowballed, and he was able to find thing after thing after thing, all these different elements that the author was using in that poem just to get this one point across, and he actually found too much, so he had to start cutting back. It's that kind of thing where you annotate, you realize, oh wait, that kind of makes sense there, and then it snowballs. Christina had something similar where she found some sounds that were buzzing, and she realized that it was similar to the bee, which is later in the, and then she just linked everything together. So annotating helps. Laying bare an author's creative process has whet the appetite of many students who now do it all the time. Even better, a heightened awareness of the reasons behind every choice that an author has made will lift your score on the AP exam, and perhaps even more important in the long run, it's likely to raise the level and maturity of your writing. Considering all these potential rewards, how could you not try it? You know where that came from, obviously. Okay, here's how to get started as an annotator. First, you want to condense the main idea of whatever you read into just a short sentence or two. You might even jot down a brief summary. I know time-wise, time isn't your friend, so you may not want to actually write down a full summary of it, but it's just of the main whole point, so you should have time to do that. If you can clearly and accurately identify a thesis, then you're already there. Sometimes it's going to be stated outright. In that case, underline or highlight it in some way when you're doing it. If the thesis is implied by the content, then you want to put it in your own words. Look for clues to the author's attitude, meaning tone, purpose, and intent. Is the passage meant to entertain, to inform, to provoke controversy, to inspire and enlighten the readers? Who are the readers? Do they have a bias? Do they have an ulterior motive? They will always have a bias and an ulterior motive, unless it's specifically there to entertain. It's hard to conceive of a piece of writing in which the author's attitude is totally hidden. Take the paragraph you've just read. Can you tell the author, me, hope to accomplish with his words? Well, if you're the least bit tempted to dissect a Okay, anyway, I'm not even going to bother with that part. Then you want to analyze structure. What comes first, second, third? Why is it ordered that way? I know that we've spoken a lot about line of reasoning. What is their line of reasoning, let alone your line of reasoning? Examine how the author creates an effect on the reader. You're going to look for word choice. Are they writing formally, informally? Do they have rhythm? Is there some figures of speech that they're using? Think about the author's qualifications to write on a topic. Details usually reveal the authority of the writer, so here's where ethos comes in. Who is it, and why should we care what they have to say? And for the same reason, when you write, you don't use I, because who are you? You're just an 11th grade student. Become an annotator, mark up passages, writing in margins, underlining noteworthy ideas and features. Two students in our one in each class, I notice their books are full of the books that they're reading on their own are full of post-it notes. You know who you are. That's a great way to annotate without actually writing in the book itself. But like that's the kind of thing you should be doing every day. And you should be reading every day, but I know you're not. Also, Nikki, you owe me my book back. I know you finished reading it by now. I don't know why I repeated the same three there, but those were them again. Okay, so we're going to look at some annotations here. This one was written by Virginia Woolf. You'll see in the side, in the margin, is what the annotation is. But instead of actually underlining or things like that, they're just putting it on the side. When you do it, you're welcome to just whatever is easiest for you. So this passage is about a quarter of the length of passage usually is on an AP exam. That's not really that accurate. I'd say this is maybe half. They usually don't give you too long. Thus, the biographer must go ahead of the rest of us, like the miner's canary detecting falsity, unreality, and the presence of obsolete conventions. So, thus, is a transitional word. It tells you that this is cut off, something came before it. So it was a longer passage about writing biographies. A miner's canary is a... Was it a simile? Yes, is a simile. If you know, historically, miners used to have canaries in a cage, and if a canary died, it meant they had to get out of there because the air quality was no longer acceptable. I know, it's terrible, but that's what they did. His sense of truth must be alive and on tiptoe. That's personification. A sense of truth can't be on tiptoe. This figure of speech, along with the synecdoche face and the metaphors 1,000 cameras, which will come up in a second, synecdoche will come up in line 8, and looking glass, line 9, indicate that figurative language is an important rhetorical feature of this passage. Just because it's there doesn't mean it's important, so we have to see how it's important still. Then again, since we live in an age when 1,000 cameras are pointed by newspapers, letters, and diaries at every character from every angle, he must be prepared to admit contradictory versions of the same face. Biography will enlarge its scope by hanging up looking glasses at odd corners, and yet from all this diversity it will bring out not a riot of confusion, but a richer ultimatum. Here the author's using sentences containing contrasts, not, but, and known, unknown for emphasis. Also, in this case, known and unknown would be opposites that are used to achieve rhetorical purpose. And again, since so much is known that used to be unknown, the question now inevitably asks itself whether the lives of great men only should be recorded. Sorry, it basically only great men should be recorded. So the word inevitably, along with the use of must as the main verb in several sentences, adds assertiveness and confidence to the writer's tone. Inevitably and must mean this is the case. It's assertive, it's definite. Just because I don't want you using it doesn't mean authors aren't going to use it. Is not anyone who has lived a life and left a record of that life worthy of biography, the failures as well as the successes, the humble as well as the illustrious? So, 3 rhetorical questions in a row, drawing the reader in, asking you your opinion. And what is greatness? And what is smallness? We must revise our standards of merit and set up new heroes for our admiration. The concluding sentence articulates the main idea of everything, which is biographers of the future may find rich source of subjects not only among the rich and famous, but ordinary people. When you think about learning about history, oftentimes we're not only looking into famous speeches made in the public eye, we also look at diaries of people who just lived in the time period. That's how you really know what the time period was like. Not from the rich and famous, but from the everyman. So here's based on the annotations, here's what they put in, how they summarized. The passage consists entirely of Woolf's thoughts about the art of biographical writing. To strengthen her presentation, she adopts an earnest and self-confident tone. Almost half of the sentences in the passage use the verb must, a sure sign that Woolf aims to instruct biographers in the requirement of their craft if they expect to tell the truth about their subjects. Figurative language gives the passage its literary quality. The use of metaphor fits the topic because biography, after all, is not an objective literal account of anything in a person's life. Rather, it is a figurative rendering of the subject, its details carefully chosen to create a certain image for the reader. Accordingly, since Woolf, don't know why I keep saying it plural, since Woolf asserts that subjects for biography can be found among all types of people, her reference to cameras and looking glasses, instruments that help us see things more clearly, are particularly apt. You can also take the cameras and looking glasses, to be not just looking at things closely, but behind glass, like the TV, camera, paparazzi, the idea of famous people, and how she's basically saying the opposite. Remember, too, that annotation is merely a means to an end. Writing a perceptive, analytical AP essay. As you annotate a passage, you'll gradually learn what to look for and begin to see the author's rhetoric becoming more and more apparent. And as you grow accustomed to annotating passages, you'll begin to find more and more rhetorical elements, maybe more than you ever expected. I did tell you at the beginning, just look for, obviously everything has to relate to PTA, but if you go in with a few in your pocket, like diction, syntax, things that you're already actively looking for, that's very beneficial for you. Then, as you plan your AP essay, you'll have some decisions to make, namely which elements to write about, which of them to emphasize, and which to discuss first, second, third, so on. You do not need to use everything you find. You are only including the things that relate to the PT or A. Here's another one now. The passage below, a newspaper column, was published prior to the 2016 presidential election, a time when candidates spoke often of American exceptionalism. The proposition that the United States, because of its unique status in the world, has both extraordinary responsibilities and extraordinary rights. You guys have lived through this election. You might have been too young to really remember much of it, but this should sound familiar to you. Its length is about the same as the passages usually on the AP exam. This is about how long it'll be. The notion of American exceptionalism, first introduced by Alexis de Tocqueville in his 2-volume classic Democracy in America, is incongruent with the contemporary use of the term. So first, the word notion indicates that the next thing that follows, American exceptionalism is not a fact, but rather a theoretical construct or idea that's open to interpretation. Notion is an idea, the idea of this. And the opening sentence contains the thesis of the passage. All that follows is an argument meant to prove that de Tocqueville's notion has been misinterpreted. So right there, you already have what it's going to be about. Tocqueville wrote, "The position of the Americans is quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one." So here's a direct quote, Logos, showing precisely where the notion of American exceptionalism originated. Void of context, this statement is vague and ambiguous, enough for us to fill in whatever blanks we want, even portraying America as the shining city of the hill where nirvana, comfort, comfortably resides. But is this what de Tocqueville meant? This is a semi-rhetorical question because he's already alluded to the fact that it's incongruent, so we already know he's going to disagree with that. When removed from its original context, it invites faulty interpretations. The question also helps to unify the passage by serving as a transition to a word-for-word rendering of Tocqueville's text, which is up here, included in the next paragraph as evident. Oh, no, sorry, here it is. And then he's going to say what it actually is. As evidence meant to convince readers that de Tocqueville's idea has been distorted. Yeah, it does move on. Actually, they're wrong. This is a little bit longer than what it actually will be. In its full context, the sentence reads, "The position of the Americans is therefore quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one. Their strictly puritanical origin, their exclusively commercial habits, even the country they inhabit, have singularly concurred to fix the mind of the American upon purely practical objects. Their passions, their wants, their education, and everything about them seems to draw the native of the United States earthward. Although his religion bids him turn from time to time a transient and distracted glance to heaven." So people, basically what they're saying is people usually only take this part, but they don't take the entire context into account. What de Tocqueville wrote bears little resemblance to the manner that American exceptionalism is touted in a contemporary discourse. In fact, an honest assessment of de Tocqueville's definition calls into question if he even meant the term as a compliment. The author again reminds readers of the passage's main point, especially since they had this long tangent where it was just the quotation. The idea of exceptionalism has a deeper, more profound meaning that America is different from other countries, as explained in lines 24 to 28. The author questions de Tocqueville's intent, thereby prodding readers to reassess the meaning of the quotation and maybe even read it again, based on what he has just said. In some circles, American exceptionalism has become the sophomoric litmus test to ascertain one's allegiance to the nation. Here's an allusion to sophomoric, which is ignorant, biased, closed-minded, etc., politicians who use the idea as a means to measure people's patriotism. The contemporary definition is nothing more than an anti-intellectual endeavor to rob the nation of one of its key elements, which is dissent. Dissent is the oxygen of any democratic society, and without it we risk choking on the fumes of our self-indulgent megalomania. The lack of dissent prohibits a nation from self-reflection, which stagnates growth. Basically, we have to disagree with each other, because if we don't disagree with each other, it's not really a democracy, and we're not going to grow. So not only does the author abhor the use of American exceptionalism as a measure of patriotism, he claims that it destroys the right to dissent, one of America's basic values. If we're saying America is the best and it can't learn from any other country, we're never going to grow. The lack of dissent prohibits a nation from self-reflection. It is to infuse the society with the toxins of arrogance and insularity. Rather than a foreign enemy, are not these weapons that topple superpowers? So now the author's choice of words with negative connotations, megalomania, stagnates, toxins, arrogance, topple, these are all negatively connotated words, adds an emotional power to the argument. America, in my view, opinion, basically saying right there, this is my, it even says, note the phrase, "in my view," it shows the author's effort to reach out to the reader and acknowledge that he has a personal stake in what otherwise might be an academic argument. He strongly espouses American exceptionalism, calling the country a unique nation, but for reasons far more noble than those cited by politicians. Just because we're unique does not mean we are the best. Here is where its greatness is realized. It is unique because it was formed on an idea that was beyond the comprehension of the individuals who conceived it. Oh my god, it's still not done? Okay, so this is definitely longer than the one you're going to get. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, Then among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Um, Using that, by the way, is a great example of logos and ethos, using something like the Declaration of Independence as a reference. Um, anyway, is not only the nation's mission statement, but has been expanded upon, not without conflict, so that those words shine as bright today as they did when they were enshrined in the nation's ethos in July 4th, 1776. So now, using these words, obviously, in allusion to the Declaration of Independence, it's a direct reference. The author lifts the notion of American exceptionalism among the fray of everyday politics, inspiring figurative language. Words shine as bright today, enshrined in the nation's ethos, meaning to stir the reader's mind and heart. So really, you have ethos, logos, and pathos in this one section. At a time when the world was dominated by inequality, along comes a cabal of great men, pledging to one another their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor for the unprecedented notion of equality. So now, here the author's appealing to your ethos, where he is kind of grandstanding. He's talking about, he doesn't want you thinking that he doesn't think America's great. He's going back to the founding fathers and how great those men were. America need not rely on myth to support itself. Rather, it would be better served by embracing the words of founding father Benjamin Rush, who famously wrote, "The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. On the contrary, nothing but the first act of this great drama is closed." Allusions to the founding father and to other inspiring figures from over 2 centuries of American history add more substance and clarity to the notion of American exceptionalism, and we know it also adds to ethos and technically you could say logos. While there is something about American exceptionalism that suggests our work is complete, Rush is offering a more arduous task. The revolution is the ongoing narrative for what is commonly referred to as the American experiment. Which I'm sure you've heard in history. The term ongoing narrative reminds readers that this idea of American exceptionalism is timeless and transcendent and must not be reduced to a simplistic political slogan. Just because we might be exceptional does not mean we're done growing. It was an experiment first articulated by Thomas Jefferson, put into practices by Washington, held together by Lincoln, sustained by Roosevelt, and pushed to higher greatness by King. What other nation can lay claim to such a unique history? So the author leaves you with a rhetorical question that really only has one possible answer, especially based on the use of names there. No other country was put to practice by Washington, held together by Lincoln, sustained by Roosevelt, so it's really impossible to name another country that falls under. So here's the summary of the annotation that they had there. The passage is an argument meant to persuade readers that the notion of American exceptionalism, originally articulated by de Tocqueville, has been distorted by politicians to mean a belief in American superiority. To prove his point, the author relies on a logical sequence of thought that includes the very words that de Tocqueville used to discuss the idea of American exceptionalism. In its context, the phrase refers to de Tocqueville's view that Americans differ from others because they are concerned with and devoted to mostly practical, everyday, down-to-earth matters. Having shown that American exceptionalism is unrelated to patriotism, the author of the passage argues that the politician's interpretation of the phrase undermines the very credo on which America was founded, especially the people's right to dissent. Quoting and paraphrasing evocative excerpts from the Declaration of Independence, he lauds the men who broke America's ties to England, fought the Revolution, and laid the foundation on which our democracy was built. To prove that America's spirit of revolt still survives, the author cites the contributions made by America's standing among nations by such legendary, almost mythic figures as Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Martin Luther King. You'll notice this is sequential. It's chronological, going in the order that that the text itself was written. This is just a summary. This isn't his final paper. However, in all honesty, add an introduction to the beginning, a conclusion at the end, and give, you don't even have to give more evaluation of the text, just a little bit more references, and this is pretty much a complete paper worthy of a 6. Even though this is literally just an annotation summary, he's proving all the points. He has to bring everything back to PTA a little bit, but he already does. Okay, normally at this point, I'd let you pick a poem, and I would annotate it for you on the smartboard. I know I did it at the beginning of the year for you with The Raven. Um, can I actually annotate with... I could use a pointer. That's not the same thing. No, I can't. If we could use, whatchamacallit, I could have done it. But anyway, you know how to annotate. I'm not gonna bother with it. Especially, you're probably not getting a poem. Um, they Poems are used one every like 20 exams. They try to shy away from them and use prose more often. But we also just did a poem. Okay, so now this is the part where you could pause and find on the website another thing to annotate yourself that I have posted with the date. You're going to summarize the annotations in the spot that's provided on there, and remember your conversation with the author of the text itself. That's what annotations are. It's you having a conversation with the author. Um, so if you pause here and do that, then the next thing I do is going to be kind of the answers. You could have your own stuff as well, but here's just some of the stuff that was noticed. There are two deep-seated idiosyncrasies of human nature that bear on our acceptance or rejection of what is offered us. The passage begins with the topic sentence. It promises a discussion of two idiosyncrasies of human nature. We have in the first place, so now we know it's going to be the first trait that was just said, an innate bias for the familiar. So this is number one. Whatever we're not by the way, bias for familiar, for clarity, the author explains bias for the familiar not by defining the term, but by setting examples of its opposite, a reversion to the familiar. Four adjectives that we're going to say in the next line, odd, queer, etc., show subtle gradations of meaning. We know from our unit on diction that they all have different connotations with them, suggesting both the richness and the complexity of the subject. You know, a shriek is worse than a scream. Stuff like that we did that in the unit. Whatever we're not thoroughly unfamiliar with is apt to seem to us odd or queer or curious or bizarre, for it is no mere trick of speech, but one of those appallingly veracious records of human nature and experience in which the history of words abounds, through which outlandish and crude attain their present meaning. So this might seem like a digression into word origins, like word etymology, but language is such an elemental part of what it means to be human that the author's using the history of words really to show how deeply in our nature the rejection of the unfamiliar is embedded. Uh, it's a complication of diverse examples, which helps the author to build a convincing case that we tend, initially at least, to be wary of things that are new. Where was I? For outlandish meant in the beginning only what doesn't belong to our own land, and uncouth was simply unknown. That's the word etymology. The change in meaning registers a universal trait. Whatever is alien to our own ways, the costume, manners, modes, or speech of another race or of other times, is strange, and strange itself, which started out by meaning merely foreign, is only another record of the same idiosyncrasies. We no longer think of strange as foreign, we think of strange as weird, bizarre, not normal. But there is still another trait that is no less broadly human. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to 5. The second trait is introduced and defined there, starting on the line where the author plays with words by restating monotonous and using other redundant words and phrases as though to give readers a taste of the very phenomenon being discussed. But there is still another trait that is no less broad human. Whatever is too familiar wearies us. Incessant recurrences without variety breeds tedium. What's the expression that goes with that? Familiarity breeds contempt. When you're used to the same, that's what the expression is. When you're used to the same thing over and over again, it gets tedious and boring. The over-iterated becomes the monotonous, and the monotonous irks and bores. And there we are. A short forward sentence there interrupts the flow of ideas, giving the reader a chance to absorb the author's ideas. And there we are. It's kind of a throwaway sentence that gives you a pause between 2 points. The oh my god, recapitulation of the passage thus far serves as a transition to the discussion that's about to follow. Neither that which we do not know at all, nor that which we know too well is to our taste. We are averse to shocks, and we go to sleep under narcotics. The author's introducing another way of looking at the issue there. Both the shock and narcotic have, I grant, at times their fascination, but they are apt to be forward, not permanent, sweet, not lasting. The source of more or less abiding satisfaction for most normal human beings lies in a happy merging of the two, in the twofold delight in an old friend recognized as new, or a new friend recognized as old. There, stylistically, the author is fond of using antithesis. They're juxtaposing these contrasting ideas when they're talking about new friends is old friend is new. That which we do not know at all, nor that which we know too well. Almost contradictions within themselves. The technique not only provides a lilting rhythm to the prose, not just this but this, not just this but this, but helps develop the author's point that satisfaction comes from a happy merging of the two. The experience and the pleasure are universal. So that's a short, pithy sentence between two lengthy sentences. Again, it's adding variety, leaving an impact on the reader, letting them have an in-between the two longer sentences. The adjective universal is particularly apt because the entire passage deals with defining characteristic of humankind. It's not just the individual. The author alludes to two widely understood experiences, love and friendship, to heighten the reader's understanding in line 39. However, the author expands the discussion to include the abstract world of art. New friend recognized. The experience and the pleasure are universal. All the lovers who have ever lived have made experiment of it. A face that you have passed 100 times nor cared to see remains the face you've always known, but becomes all at once the more beautiful and thrilling object in the world. The person you've never known before, you find all at once you've known from all eternity. Now art, like love, sends its roots deep into what we are. And our most permanent aesthetic satisfaction arises as a rule from things familiar enough to give the pleasure of recognition, yet not so trite as to rob us of the other pleasure of surprise. Here, the author is reiterating the basic point of the discussion in terms of our emotional reactions to art, as opposed to just things in general being new and different. We are keen for the new, but we insist that it establish some connection with what is friendly and our own. We want the old, but we want it to seem somehow new. Think about TV shows. That's a good way of looking at this, actually. Things may recur as often as they please, so long as they surprise us. Like the ghost in Hamlet. So, again, the author's rephrasing, reciting the main idea of the passage to prepare readers for the literary reference, which he's about to do with Hamlet, each time they appear. The allusion to Hamlet casts light on the ghost of Hamlet's father. We know beforehand that the ghost is going to show up, but its appearance gives us a start. I feel like that last part's kind of a stretch. If you've ever read Hamlet or if you've seen the play, it's not really that shocking. You know what's going to happen. Okay. So, I just remembered we're going to do this. And I do want to show you the examples. Okay, this might end up being a 3-day lesson. So here's the sample prompt that I'm going to show you what we came up with in review classes last year, because we can't write it together now, since we are remote learning. I wonder if people would be open to making a single document and all of us writing one together at the exact same time. That'd be too hard without saying things out loud, though. Let me think about it. I don't know how that would work. So what follows is part of an essay, Our March to Washington, written by Theodore Winthrop about going off to fight in the Civil War. Carefully read the excerpt and then write an essay which analyzes the rhetorical strategies Winthrop uses to convey his feelings about the experience. I remember this is a powerful one. So, are you analyzing, comparing, contrasting, etc.? What are you doing? It literally says right there. You're analyzing. We're not going to annotate because together because we can't. You're all separate. But while I'm reading through it, please. Oh no, do I not have it on here? Okay, so instead I'm going to say you are going to read it on your own. It'll be attached. I mean, not attached. It'll be in uh, today's lesson, and all the things that we're reading from are in review classes day 2. So you can read the article there. Please annotate, come up with your own ideas for it, and then hit pause now. And then when you come back, we're going to look at what we came up with last year based on it. So hit pause now. Okay, hopefully you've done that. So last year we decided on what the literary devices were going to be that we're going to talk about. Don't forget, we're going to go in the actual chronological order, but we wanted to decide which ones to use, which ones had the most impact on the text and the PTA, and then figure out how we could get that to relate to the tone purpose. Audience really doesn't come in that much. So here's the essay. Here's the summary. If it's a poem, obviously you don't have to order it chronologically. It's a little bit harder, but I told you 19 times out of 20 there's no poem on the test, especially because this is a class based on prose, not on poetry. So in the excerpt from Theodore Winthrop's Our March to Washington, the reader is immersed in the experiences of the soldier leaving for battle. The throng of people witnessing this exodus into war is depicted through the use of imagery, conveying a celebratory and nationalistic tone. As he writes, the men, boys. The emotional diction expressed by the author serves to paint a picture of the prideful, awed onlookers as they experience the procession of brave soldiers. This notion is further evident in the use of an exclamatory statement in the middle of a sentence when depicting the size of the crowd. The motif of the enormity of this group is used throughout the entire work, unifying the experience of these men and appealing to the pathos of the audience. So this was the summary we came up with based on the annotations that we made. Just like we saw the summary based on these annotations. Where are they? Oh my god, it was further back than I thought. Like this, we did one based on the story that you hopefully just read. It's well written, right? I like that one. Then we came up, this was the one that was given to us in the book, and then I'll go over what we came up with for our introduction. So the first person narrator of the episode is a young man on his way to war. He and his regiment are parading through a city where people have gathered to send them off. First, he is assigned to keep onlookers away from a large cannon, a howitzer, named a peacemaker. Whether he's aware of the irony of applying that label to a machine of war remains unclear. It's not actually said in there, but in all likelihood he isn't because he seems too caught up in the spirit of the moment. Indeed, he is impressed by the size of the cheering crowd. Twice he uses the phrase enormous crowd, once with an exclamation point for additional emphasis, the exclamation point in the middle of the sentence. He notes the men's expressions of truculent and patriotic hopes. He also notices that the women shed cheers and say, "God bless you, boys," but he seems unmindful of the feelings that evoke such responses. In other words, this is not a time for subtle observation or reflection. Yet he reads in the faces of onlookers that they seem to be taking the measure of my coffin. In other words, before continuing his description of the parade, the speaker senses briefly the dark implications behind the noisy celebration, if however briefly. It was worth a life, that march, he says, an opinion that can be interpreted in two ways. It can mean simply that the march was an experience of a lifetime. On the other hand, it suggests that the speaker knows that he, as well as many of his confrades, will soon be giving up their lives, a thought reinforced by the phrase terrible enthusiasm, which is an oxymoron, in which terrible seems to be used in the sense of terrifying or horrible, although at that time the word also carries a connotation of awe-inspiring. P.S. It still does hold that connotation. What is more, the speaker uses the term tokens of sympathy for the small gifts, handkerchiefs, gloves, combs, soaps, etc. that the crowd bestows on the troops. In a sense, this could also be the speaker's way of drawing attention to the discrepancy between the sacrifice he and his comrades may be about to make in battle and the trivial price paid by the people left behind. And the seemingly insignificant gifts may also be interpreted as more personal expressions of support. Um, this summary, by the way, they annotated and they found way too much information to include in the paper in the short time frame that you have. So if this was us, we would have to figure out what doesn't directly relate to the PTA or what doesn't have as much of an impact, and we'd have to start trimming it away. On one level, then, the passage is a rather superficial depiction of a typical farewell march of troops going to fight. On a deeper level, though, readers are privy to the apprehension felt by one young soldier. His fears and anxieties are presented not as blatant statements, but by hints and indirections. Like most of the crowd, more inclined to shout bullies than benedictions, he puts up a brave front at a time of great peril and uncertainty. So, based on our summary, we began the paper. We wrote the introduction and a little bit of the next section. When something is the norm, people tend to disregard it. Such is the case in Theodore Winthrop's Our March to Washington. The speaker, a young Civil War soldier, uses the contradicting tones of celebratory and stoic. There you have your tone. Do we already have purpose? We have speaker. To describe the ignorance of, there's the purpose, ignorance of civilians in the face of war. He describes the crowd's blind excitement for the war using oxymoron imagery, exclamatory sentences, and situational irony. So it seems like a lot that we have 4, but remember, we're not making 4 separate paragraphs on that. We're just going in order. And if we only have one example of oxymoron, and it's in the introduction, it's in our first body, that's fine. You don't have to keep going back into it. The speaker begins by addressing the setting of the march. He uses imagery-stirring words such as enormous, truculent, and patriotic to emphasize the size and excitement of the gathering mass. This is met with the anticipated excitement on the part of the men. So this is all directly related to the purpose. It's describing the ignorance of the civilians in the face of the war, and it's also relating to the tone of celebratory. At the beginning, that's how it seems. Okay, so that is it for this one. The next thing we do is we're going to look at the new sample given by AP. I think I'm going to have you guys write your own again. I'll give you plenty of time for it, don't worry. And then I'll grade it, and we're going to look at the samples that AP gives. We'll talk more about that at the time. Have a fantastic few days.